A pregnant wife lies bleeding on a marble floor, surrounded by shattered Christmas ornaments. Her millionaire husband just kicked her in front of 200 guests. The music has stopped. Every phone is recording, and he is still standing over her, adjusting his cufflinks like nothing happened. But then the doors burst open. A man in a Santa suit walks in. He tears off the beard, and her husband's face turns white, because that Santa is her father, a CEO worth 10 times his fortune, and he has come to deliver a very different kind of gift. What happens next will destroy an empire and expose secrets no amount of money can bury. Stay with me. Drop a comment where you are listening from, and if you love stories about justice served cold, hit subscribe. This is going to be satisfying. 6 hours from now, I would be lying on a marble floor surrounded by shattered Christmas ornaments, blood on my lip, my husband's Italian leather shoe still visible at the edge of my vision. 200 people would be watching, phones would be recording, and everything I had spent 5 years hiding would finally be exposed to the world. But in this moment, standing in front of our bedroom mirror, I was still pretending everything was fine. My name is Claire Weston, and I had spent 5 years perfecting the art of beautiful lies. The dress was a soft sky blue, custom made by a designer whose name I could never pronounce correctly, tailored to accommodate my 7-month pregnant belly. Marcus had chosen it. Of course, he chose everything. The dress, the jewelry, the words I was allowed to say at parties, the friends I was allowed to keep, which, by now, was none. I ran my fingers over the silk, feeling the baby kick beneath my palm. A boy. The doctor said, a son who would inherit his father's empire and, if I was not careful, his father's cruelty. I heard Marcus in his office down the hall, his voice sharp on a phone call. Something about quarterly projections and investor confidence and the particular tone he used when someone had disappointed him. The language of money and power that had once seemed exciting now felt like bars on a cage I had walked into willingly. 5 years ago, I had been a different woman, independent, ambitious. I had my own interior design business, my own apartment, my own life. Then I met Marcus Hale at a charity gala not unlike the one we would attend tonight, and everything changed. He was magnetic, charming, the kind of man who made you feel like the only person in the room when he looked at you. He sent flowers every day for a month. He remembered every detail I ever told him. He made me believe I was special. By the time I realized the truth, it was too late. My fingers trembled as I fastened the diamond necklace he had given me for our 3rd anniversary. The night he gave it to me, he had also told me I was getting fat and needed to watch what I ate. The diamonds were an apology he never actually spoke. That was how it worked with Marcus. Cruelty followed by gifts. Gifts followed by cruelty. A cycle so predictable, I could set my watch by it. I was reaching for my clutch when I noticed his jacket draped over the chair by the window. A receipt peeked from the pocket. White paper against dark wool. I should have ignored it. I had learned to ignore so many things. The lipstick on his collar, the late nights at the office, the way his phone was always face down, always locked, always hidden. But something made me reach for it anyway. Maybe it was the baby, making me braver. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the small, stubborn part of me that refused to die no matter how hard Marcus tried to kill it. The Plaza Hotel, couples massage and champagne service. December 14th, our anniversary. I stared at the receipt, my vision blurring. December 14th. I had spent that day alone in this penthouse, convinced Marcus was closing the deal in Chicago. I had ordered Thai food and watched old movies and cried myself to sleep because my husband could not be bothered to remember 4 years of marriage. He had been at the plaza with someone else, while I sat alone in this beautiful prison, making excuses for him. The door opened behind me. I shoved the receipt into my clutch, my heart pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. Marcus stood in the doorway, adjusting his cufflinks. At 38, he was still the most handsome man I had ever seen. Dark hair silvering at the temples, jaw sharp enough to cut glass, eyes that could make you feel like the only person in the world or absolutely invisible, depending on his mood. Tonight, his eyes were cold. "You are not wearing that necklace," he said. I touched the diamonds at my throat, the ones he had given me with one hand while breaking me down with the other. "You gave this to me. The emeralds match better. Change it." I wanted to argue. I wanted to throw the receipt in his face and demand answers. I wanted to scream that I knew about the plaza, knew about the champagne, knew about whoever he had been with while I sat alone on our anniversary. But I had learned what happened when I argued. The bruises had faded, but the lessons remained. So I unclasped the diamonds and reached for the emerald pendant he preferred. The Hendersons will be there tonight, he continued, watching me in the mirror with the detached interest of a man inspecting property. Catherine Henderson sits on the board of three major foundations. Her husband controls significant real estate holdings in the Hamptons. You will be charming. You will not discuss politics, religion, or your father. My father, Richard Weston, CEO of Weston Capital, one of the largest private equity firms on the East Coast. The man who had warned me about Marcus. The man I had not spoken to in 4 years because Marcus convinced me that my father was controlling, manipulative, toxic. The irony was not lost on me. I know how to behave at a party, Marcus. His reflection smiled, but his eyes did not. Do you? Yeah, because last month at the Brennan Gala, you told Elizabeth Brennan that her foundation's approach to homeless outreach was, and I quote, problematic. It was problematic. They were essentially criminalizing poverty while pretending to help. He was across the room before I could blink, his hand closing around my wrist. Not hard enough to bruise. He was always careful about bruises in visible places, but hard enough to remind me who held the power in this room, in this marriage, in my entire life. You will smile, he said softly, his breath warm against my ear. You will nod. You will tell everyone how happy you are, because you are happy. Claire, I have given you everything. This penthouse, these clothes, this life. The least you can do is not embarrass me. He released my wrist and stepped back, his expression pleasant again, as if the last 30 seconds had not happened, as if he had not just reminded me that I was property, not a partner. The car will be here in 10 minutes. Do not make us late. He left, and I stood there staring at my reflection. A beautiful woman in a beautiful dress in a beautiful prison. The emeralds glittered at my throat like a collar. My baby kicked, a small flutter beneath my ribs. I pressed my hand against my belly, feeling the movement, the life, the reminder that I was not completely alone. I know it, I whispered to him. I know we cannot stay. I just do not know how to leave. The receipt from the plaza was still in my clutch. Evidence of betrayal I could not prove and would not be believed anyway. But I kept it. I did not know why. Maybe because it was the first piece of truth I had allowed myself to hold. The first crack in the denial I had built like armor around my heart. Tonight was the Weston Foundation Christmas Gala. 200 of Manhattan's elite gathered to celebrate charity and excess in equal measure. My father would not be there. Marcus had made sure of that years ago, convincing me to cut tail, to choose my husband over my family. But as I took one last look in the mirror, something felt different. The woman staring back at me looked tired, trapped, done. I did not know that in 6 hours, everything would shatter. I just knew that I could not keep pretending much longer. The Grandview Hotel ballroom was a cathedral of wealth, its vaulted ceilings dripping with crystal chandeliers that cast fractured light across the marble floors like scattered diamonds. A 20-foot Christmas tree dominated one corner, decorated in gold and silver ornaments, surrounded by wrapped boxes and velvet ribbons that no one would ever open. They were props, like everything else in this world. Like me, the orchestra played soft carols as guests mingled with champagne flutes, their laughter carefully modulated, their smiles perfectly practiced. These were people who had learned to perform happiness the way others learned to play piano, with discipline, with repetition, without any real feeling at all. Marcus transformed the moment we stepped through the doors. His hand found the small of my back, warm and possessive, guiding me through the crowd with a smile that made everyone believe we were the perfect couple. He laughed at jokes that were not funny. He remembered the names of children he had never met. He asked about vacations and business ventures and sick relatives with such apparent sincerity that even I almost believed he cared. He was magnificent in his deception, and I hated him for it. I hated that he could turn it on and off like a switch, that the cruelty he showed me in private vanished the moment there were witnesses. It made me wonder sometimes if I was imagining things, if I was, as he often suggested, too emotional, too sensitive, Too dramatic. If the problem was not him but me, but my wrist still ached from where he had grabbed me. That was real. The receipt in my clutch was real. The years of small humiliations and quiet violence were real. Claire, darling, you look absolutely radiant. Catherine Henderson appeared before us, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her smile perfectly practiced, her diamonds perfectly enormous. She was the kind of woman who had never worked a day in her life, but sat on 17 charity boards and believed that made her a humanitarian. The kind of woman who would never understand what it meant to be trapped. Thank you, Catherine. I produced my own practice smile, the one I had worn so often it felt like a second skin. You look wonderful. Pregnancy suits you so beautifully. Marcus must be absolutely thrilled. Marcus's hand tightened on my back, a warning I had learned to recognize. We cannot wait to welcome our son, he said smoothly, his voice warm with false glory. Claire has been such a trooper through everything. Morning sickness, swollen ankles, the whole ordeal. But she never complains. Because complaining was not allowed. But I did not say that. Catherine prattled on about nursery designs and nanny recommendations and the importance of finding the right preschool early, while I nodded and smiled and felt myself disappearing. This was my role, the beautiful wife, the silent supporter, the woman behind the great man, a decoration, not a person. I excused myself to find the restroom, but really I needed to breathe. The hallway outside the ballroom was quieter, the sounds of the party muffled by heavy doors. I leaned against the wall, pressing my palm against my belly, trying to steady my racing heart. The baby was active tonight, kicking and rolling as if he sensed my anxiety. Rough night. I turned to find a woman watching me from a few feet away. Red dress that clung to every curve, dark hair cascading over bare shoulders, eyes that held secrets and knew how to use them. Vanessa Cross, Marcus's executive assistant, his mistress. I had suspected for over a year, but never had proof. The late nights at the office, the business trips that always seemed to include her, the way Marcus's voice softened when he spoke to her on the phone, softer than he had spoken to me in years. Until that receipt, the plaza, our anniversary. I am fine, I said automatically, the words as hollow as they always were. Vanessa smiled, and there was something sharp in it, something almost like pity, which was somehow worse than hatred. Of course you are. We are all fine. That is the rule. Is it not smile and pretend and never let them see you break? She walked past me, close enough that I could smell her perfume. The same perfume that sometimes lingered on Marcus's collar when he came home late. The same perfume I had pretended not to notice 100 times. By the way, she said over her shoulder, pregnancy looks exhausting on you. I do not know how you manage. She disappeared into the ballroom, and I stood there feeling like I had been slapped. Not by her words, though those stung too, but by the realization that she knew. She knew about the receipt, about the lies, about all of it, and she was not even trying to hide anymore. Somehow I made it back to the party. Somehow I smiled through dinner, through speeches, through the endless parade of wealthy people congratulating themselves on their generosity. Marcus held court at our table, telling stories that made everyone laugh, his charm so bright it was almost blinding. No one saw the way his jaw tightened when I excused myself to use the restroom again. No one heard him lean close and whisper, "People will think something is wrong with you if you keep disappearing." No one noticed the way his fingers dug into my arm when I tried to move away. No one ever noticed. The evening dragged on like a slow torture. I drifted through conversations like a ghost, present but not really there. And then, near the end of the night, I found myself standing by the Christmas tree, staring at the ornaments, thinking about all the holidays I had spent pretending to be happy. Last Christmas, Marcus had given me a diamond bracelet. He had also called me stupid in front of his mother and refused to let me visit my parents. The Christmas before that, he had surprised me with a trip to Paris. He had also thrown a glass at the wall because I packed the wrong shoes. Every beautiful thing came with a price. I was so tired of paying. Marcus appeared beside me, champagne in hand, his face flushed from drinking and performing and being the center of attention. His eyes swept over me with the assessing look of a man checking inventory. "We need to leave soon," I said quietly, hating the pleading note in my voice. "My feet are swelling. The baby is very active. I need to rest." We will leave when I say we leave. Marcus, please. I am exhausted. The doctor said I need to avoid stress. He laughed, a short, ugly sound that had nothing to do with humor. Stress, everything is stress with you. You are always tired, always complaining, always making excuses. I am 7 months pregnant. My mother worked until the day she delivered. She did not whine about swollen feet. I felt something shift inside me. The careful control I had maintained for 5 years began to crack at the edges. I found the receipt. Oh, I heard myself say. The words came out before I could stop them, pushed by exhaustion and hurt, and the small, desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, he would finally tell the truth. Marcus's face went blank for a fraction of a second. What receipt? The plaza. Our anniversary. Couples massage. Champagne service. My voice was trembling, but I could not stop now. You told me you were in Chicago. You said you had meetings you could not reschedule. I spent our anniversary alone. Marcus, alone in that penthouse, ordering takeout and watching old movies and crying because I thought my husband was too busy for me. But you were not busy. You were at the plaza. With her. I did not have to say who. We both knew. His face went through several expressions. Surprise, calculation, and then something that looked almost like relief, as if he was glad the pretense was finally over. You went through my things, he said quietly, dangerously. It fell out of your pocket. You went through my things, he repeated. After everything I have given you, this is how you repay me, by spying, by accusing me. I am not accusing you, I am asking for the truth. The truth, his laugh was bitter. The truth is that you are paranoid, emotional, exactly like your father always said you were. I should have listened to him. The lie was so blatant, so absurd, that something inside me finally snapped. My father never said that. You are the one who said that. You are the one who convinced me my family was toxic. You are the one who isolated me from everyone who cared about me. My voice had risen. Heads were turning. I could see Catherine Henderson watching from across the room, her eyebrows raised in delighted scandal. I did not care anymore. Lower your voice, Marcus hissed. You are embarrassing yourself. I am embarrassing myself. You are the one sleeping with your assistant while your pregnant wife waits at home. You are the one who lies every single day. You are the one who— Enough! The word cut through my tirade like a blade. Marcus stepped closer, and I saw something in his eyes I had never seen before. Not cold calculation, not careful cruelty, pure rage. The mask was off, and what lived beneath it was terrifying. You ungrateful woman, body breathed. I gave you everything. Everything. And this is how you thank me, by making a scene at the most important event of the year, by humiliating me in front of everyone who matters. I stepped back, suddenly afraid. Marcus, no, you do not get to speak. You do not get to accuse me. You do not get to stand there in the dress I bought and the jewelry I gave you and pretend you are some kind of victim. I turned to walk away. To finally walk away from this man and this marriage and this life that had been slowly killing me. His foot connected with my hip. The impact sent me backward into the Christmas tree. I heard ornaments shattering, felt glass in my hair, saw the ceiling spinning above me, then the cold marble floor against my back, hard and unforgiving. My arms wrapped instinctively around my belly, protecting my baby, protecting the only thing in my life that still felt pure. The music stopped. The laughter died. 200 people stood frozen, champagne flutes suspended, mouths open, watching the most powerful man in the room reveal exactly what he was. For a long moment, no one moved. No one spoke. The silence was so complete I could hear the ornaments still rolling across the marble floor, could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, could hear the soft whir of phones switching to video mode. Then the doors burst open. A gust of December air swept through the ballroom, carrying snowflakes that sparkled under the chandeliers like tiny diamonds. And from that white blur of winter stepped a figure in red velvet and black boots, a Santa beard obscuring his face, a sack of presents over one shoulder. He took in the scene in an instant: the shattered tree, the frozen crowd, the woman on the floor clutching her pregnant belly while her husband stood over her with clenched fists. He tore off the beard, and I saw my father, Richard Weston, CEO of Weston Capital, the man who had warned me, the man I had abandoned, the man who had never stopped loving me even when I pushed him away. He crossed the room in 5 long strides, his Santa coat billowing behind him like a cape. He was supposed to be doing the children's charity event in the other wing, a surprise appearance for sick kids from the local hospital. He was not supposed to be here. But here he was, kneeling beside me on the marble floor, his hands trembling as he touched my shoulder. "Claire, sweetheart, are you hurt?" I could not answer. The world was still spinning, my hips screaming with pain, my baby fluttering frantically beneath my ribs. I wanted to tell him I was fine, that it was not as bad as it looked, that everything was okay, but the lies would not come anymore. I had used them all up. My father's eyes moved from me to Marcus, who stood frozen near the ruined Christmas tree, his face cycling through expressions like a slot machine trying to land on the right combination of excuses. "She fell," Marcus said, finding his voice. "She lost her balance near the tree. The pregnancy affects her equilibrium. I tried to catch her, but I was too far away." Richard stood slowly. At 64, he was not the physically imposing man he had once been. His hair had gone silver, his shoulders had rounded with age, his hands bore the spots of time. But in that moment, standing in his ridiculous Santa suit in the middle of Manhattan's most prestigious gala, he seemed to fill the entire room. "I saw what you did," he said quietly. "Half the room saw what you did, and their phones captured what they saw." For the first time, Marcus looked genuinely afraid. His eyes darted to the crowd, where dozens of phones were still raised, still recording, still documenting the exact moment his careful image shattered. "It was an accident," he insisted. "A misunderstanding. Ask anyone." She stumbled. "I was nowhere near her." "You kicked her." My father's voice was ice. "You kicked your pregnant wife in front of 200 witnesses. And you think you can spin that?" "Richard, let us discuss this privately. There is no need to make a scene. You made the scene when you assaulted my daughter, when you endangered my grandchild, when you proved exactly what I always knew you were." Marcus's composure cracked. "I gave her everything. Everything. Do you have any idea what she would be without me? A failed designer with a useless degree and no prospects? I made her. I created her. And this is how she repays me. By bleeding on the floor." Richard knelt beside me again, his strong arms lifting me gently from the ground. Glass tinkled as it fell from my hair. Somewhere behind us, I heard someone calling for an ambulance, heard the whispered shock of guests who had never expected to witness such ugliness at such a beautiful party. "I have you," my father murmured. "You are safe now. I am so sorry I was not here sooner. I am so sorry I let you push me away." I wanted to tell him it was not his fault. I wanted to tell him that I had made my choice, that I had believed Marcus's lies, that I had wasted 4 years pretending everything was fine, but the words stuck in my throat, trapped behind years of silence, years of denial, years of beautiful lies that had finally crumbled to dust. The paramedics arrived within minutes. As they loaded me onto a stretcher, I caught one last glimpse of Marcus standing alone by the shattered Christmas tree, surrounded by broken ornaments and the ruins of his carefully constructed image. He did not look powerful anymore. He looked small, pathetic, exactly what he had always been beneath the charm and the money and the $1,000 suits. The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens and questions and the steady beeping of monitors. My father held my hand the entire time, his grip firm and warm and real, in a way nothing had felt real for years. "The baby," I managed to whisper. "Is the baby okay?" "We will find out soon," he said. "Just breathe. Focus on breathing. I am here. I am not going anywhere." At Manhattan General Hospital, they wheeled me into a private room while doctors swarmed around me like white-coated angels. Catherine Pierce, a woman with kind eyes and steady hands, pressed the ultrasound wand against my belly and found my baby's heartbeat immediately, strong and steady, like a tiny drum beating out a rhythm of survival. I burst into tears. "He is fine," Pierce said softly. "You are both going to be fine, but you need rest. No stress, no confrontation. Your body has been through enough." She did not know that my entire life had become confrontation. That stress was not an event but a constant state, that I had forgotten what it felt like to simply breathe without fear. My mother Eleanor arrived an hour later, her face pale, her hands shaking as she embraced me. She smelled like the perfume she had worn my entire childhood, like home and safety and everything I had lost. "My baby," she whispered into my hair. "My poor baby. I knew something was wrong. I knew it, but you kept saying everything was fine." "I thought it was," I said. "I thought this was just what marriage was." She pulled back, her eyes fierce. "This is not marriage. This is abuse, and it ends now." The video went viral before sunrise. By morning, the hashtag Justice for Claire was trending across every platform. News anchors played the footage on loop, freezing on the moment Marcus's foot lifted, the moment my body crumpled, the moment 200 witnesses gasped in unison. Strangers debated whether it was real, whether I had provoked him, whether money would make it disappear. But the video was undeniable. The violence was undeniable. And for the first time in 5 years, someone was finally listening. Marcus released a statement through his publicist calling the incident a tragic misunderstanding during a stressful evening. He spoke of exhaustion and pressure and the burden of building an empire. He did not apologize. Men like Marcus never apologize. They explain, they justify, and they reframe, but the video told a different story. The video told the truth. My father stood by the window of my hospital room, watching the snow fall over the city. His phone had not stopped buzzing since midnight. Calls from lawyers and journalists and old friends offering support. "We can destroy him," he said quietly. "Legally, financially, publicly. I have the resources. I have the connections. Just say the word." I looked at the fetal monitor, at the steady rhythm of my baby's heartbeat, at the proof that life continued even when everything else fell apart. "It is not about destroying him," I said. "It is about ending this. It is about being free." My father nodded slowly, his eyes still fixed on the falling snow. "Then we will get you free, whatever it takes, whatever it costs. I failed you once. I will not fail you again." Outside, the December sun was rising, painting the snow in shades of gold and pink. For the first time in years, I felt something that might have been hope. But I did not know yet that Marcus was not finished. Men like him never surrender easily, and the fight had only just begun. 3 days after the Christmas party, I sat in my hospital bed watching the news coverage with a strange sense of detachment. There was my face on the screen, split with Marcus's, the trembling wife and the composed businessman. There were the headlines, bold and damning. There was the video, playing again and again, each replay another nail in the coffin of my marriage. My father's lawyers had filed an emergency protective order within hours of the incident. Public opinion had turned decisively against Marcus. Sponsors were dropping his charity events. Business partners were issuing statements distancing themselves from his company. The empire he had spent a decade building was cracking at its foundation. For the first time in 5 years, I was not alone. For the first time, people believed me. I allowed myself to believe it was over. The district attorney is considering criminal charges. My father told me that afternoon. He sat in the chair beside my bed, looking more tired than I had ever seen him. The last few days had aged him, worry etching new lines into his face. Assault, reckless endangerment. The video is irrefutable evidence. And the baby, safe. The doctors say you can go home tomorrow. To our home, I mean, the Connecticut house. Your mother has already set up the guest suite, the one with the bay window you always loved as a child. Home, the word felt strange in my mouth. For 5 years, home had been Marcus's penthouse, his rules, his world. The idea of returning to my childhood bedroom felt like stepping back in time. "Thank you," I whispered. My father reached for my hand, his grip warm and familiar. "I should have fought harder. When you told me you were marrying him, I should have done more than just warn you. I should have shown you who he really was. I should have hired investigators, gathered evidence, made you see. I would not have believed you. I was in love, or I thought I was." I stared at the ceiling, remembering the woman I had been at 27. So certain, so naive. He was everything I thought I wanted. Powerful, confident. He made me feel chosen, special. like I was the only woman in the world who mattered. That is how predators work. They make you feel special until they own you. Then they make you feel worthless, so you will not leave. I turned to look at him, this man who had built an empire of his own, but never used it to control the people he loved. How do you know so much about it? His expression darkened. Your grandmother, my mother, she was married to a man like Marcus before she met my father. She never talked about it much, but I remember the scars. The way she flinched at loud noises. The way she never felt safe. Even years later, he squeezed my hand. When I saw that video, when I saw him kick you, I saw her. And I knew I had failed to protect you the way my father protected her. We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of generations of pain settling between us. The door opened, and a man in an expensive suit entered. Jonathan Mercer, Marcus's attorney. His face was professionally neutral, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. The eyes of a man who made his living finding weaknesses and exploiting them. Mrs. Hale, he said smoothly, I apologize for the intrusion. I have some documents that require your immediate attention. My father stood, positioning himself between me and Mercer like a shield. Whatever you have to say, you can say through our attorneys. This is harassment. I am afraid this is time sensitive. Mr. Weston, it concerns your daughter's prenuptial agreement, the one she signed before her marriage. The room went cold. I remembered signing that document. I was 27, desperately in love, eager to prove I was not marrying Marcus for his money. My father had begged me to have a lawyer review it. I had refused. I trusted Marcus. I wanted to show him that trust. I had been so stupid. Mercer placed a leather folder on the table beside my bed. Paragraph 14, subsection C. I will read the relevant portion. Quote, in the event of marital dissolution initiated by either party, any claims of domestic abuse, emotional distress, or physical harm not previously documented through official law enforcement reports shall be considered unsubstantiated for purposes of custody determination and asset division. End quote. The words took a moment to sink in. I read them twice, 3 times, feeling the trap close around me. What does that mean? My mother asked from the doorway. She had arrived silently, her face pale with worry. Mercer smiled his professional smile, the one that never reached his eyes. It means that while the unfortunate incident at the Christmas party is certainly documented now, Mrs. Hale's claims of prior abuse are not. She never filed police reports. She never sought medical attention for injuries. She never confided in anyone who might serve as a witness. In the eyes of the law, the pattern of abuse she might claim simply does not exist. Because he threatened her, my father said through clenched teeth. Because she was afraid. Because that is what abusers do. They make their victims too scared to seek help. Perhaps, but the prenuptial agreement does not account for fear. It accounts for documentation, evidence, proof. Mercer turned to me, his expression almost sympathetic. My client is prepared to pursue full custody of your unborn child, given your history of emotional instability, your estrangement from your family, and your recent, shall we say, dramatic public accusations. A court may well find you an unfit mother. I could not breathe. Furthermore, Mercer continued, the video from the Christmas party, while damaging to my client's reputation, shows only a single incident, an incident that Mr. Hale deeply regrets and for which he is seeking professional help. Courts do not remove custody rights for a single moment of poor judgment, especially not from a father who can provide every material advantage for his child. My father stepped toward Mercer, and for a moment I thought he might actually strike him. Get out of this room, now. I am simply informing your daughter of her legal situation. Mr. Hale remains open to a private settlement, one that would be far less damaging to everyone involved, one that would allow Claire to maintain some relationship with her child, rather than losing everything in a prolonged custody battle. He placed a business card on the folder. Call me when she is ready to be reasonable. He left, and the silence he left behind was suffocating. He cannot do this, my mother said, her voice breaking. Surely he cannot do this. We have the video. Everyone saw what he did. But I knew Marcus. I knew what he was capable of. I knew that the prenup was not a coincidence. It was a trap he had laid years ago, waiting for exactly this moment. He had planned for my eventual rebellion the way he planned hostile takeovers and merger acquisitions, with precision, with patience, with absolute certainty that he would win. The public might hate him, the sponsors might abandon him, but in a courtroom, with his army of lawyers and his carefully constructed paper trail and his endless resources, he could still win. He could still take my baby. I looked at my father, and I saw the same realization dawning in his eyes. The understanding that this fight would not be won with public opinion alone, that Marcus had built defenses we had not anticipated, that we were outgunned, outmaneuvered, and running out of time. "We need to find something," I said slowly, the words forming as the thought crystallized. "Something bigger than the video, something that proves what he really is, not just what he did to me, but what he has been doing all along." "Like what?" "I do not know yet, but I lived in that house for 5 years. I saw things, heard things, phone calls in the middle of the night, meetings with men who never gave their names, documents he locked away before I could read them." I pressed my hand against my belly, feeling my baby move beneath my palm. "He has secrets. Everyone like him does. Secrets that would make the Christmas party video look like nothing. We just need to find them." My father nodded, his jaw set with determination. "Then we find them, whatever it takes." Outside, the snow had started falling again, thick flakes swirling past the window. The city looked almost peaceful, almost innocent. But I knew better now. Innocence was an illusion. And peace was something you had to fight for. 1 week after leaving the hospital, I learned that Marcus's war had only begun. I was staying at my parents' estate in Connecticut, surrounded by security guards and lawyers and the constant hum of strategy sessions. The house felt both familiar and strange, a relic from a childhood that seemed to belong to a different person. My bedroom had been preserved exactly as I left it at 18. Posters and books and dreams that had nothing to do with the woman I had become. My mother brought me tea every morning and tried to keep me calm. My father worked the phones relentlessly, calling in favors, building alliances, marshaling the considerable resources of Weston Capital for battle. The lawyers came and went with documents and questions and carefully worded advice. But Marcus had resources too, and he was not afraid to use them. The first tabloid story appeared on a Tuesday morning. The headline screamed across my phone screen: "Claire Weston History of Instability." Below it, old photos from my college years, dug up from some forgotten social media account, showing me at parties with drinks in my hand. A story that painted me as wild, irresponsible, troubled. Anonymous sources claimed I had always been dramatic and attention-seeking. A former roommate I barely remembered was quoted saying I was difficult to live with. An ex-boyfriend from freshman year claimed I had anger issues. "This is lies," right, my mother said, throwing the tablet aside. "All of it. Fabricated garbage designed to destroy your reputation." But lies repeated often enough start to feel like truth. I watched the comment sections fill with doubt, with accusations, with the particular cruelty that strangers reserve for women who dare to speak up. Gold digger? Drama queen? She probably provoked him. Did you see her face in the video? She barely looked hurt. This is all for attention. By Wednesday, the narrative had shifted. Marcus released a carefully edited video of himself looking haggard and remorseful, sitting in what appeared to be a therapist's office. He claimed he had made a terrible mistake in a moment of extreme stress. He talked about the pressure of his business, the upcoming fatherhood, his love for me despite our difficulties. He announced he was seeking professional help. "I take full responsibility for my actions that night," he said to the camera, his voice cracking at precisely the right moments. "I was wrong. I was stressed beyond my limits. But that is not who I am. I love my wife. I love my unborn son, and I will spend the rest of my life making this right." The public, always hungry for redemption stories, began to soften. "He is winning," I said to my father that night. We were in his study, surrounded by documents and empty coffee cups and the debris of a week spent fighting an invisible enemy. "He is actually winning. A week ago, everyone hated him. Now they feel sorry for him. The public is fickle, but courts are not. We just need something concrete, something his lawyers cannot spin. Like what I spent 5 years being, the perfect silent wife. I did not document anything. I did not tell anyone. I did not take pictures of bruises or record his threats or keep a diary of every cruel thing he said. I just survived, day by day, moment by moment. That was all I could do. My father was quiet for a long moment, staring at the fireplace where logs crackled and popped. Then he said, "There might be someone who can help." The next afternoon, a woman arrived at the estate gate. She was about my age, with sharp eyes behind thick-rimmed glasses and an air of barely contained energy. She wore jeans and a worn leather jacket and boots that had seen better days. Nothing like the polished professionals who had been parading through our home all week. Drew Callahan. I had not seen her in 3 years. We had been roommates in college, inseparable through our 20s. She was there when I met Marcus, there when I fell in love with him, there when I started to disappear into his world. She had tried to warn me, tried to point out the red flags I refused to see. And then, slowly, Marcus had convinced me that she was a bad influence. Too opinionated, too independent, too much of everything he did not want me to be. I had let her go, like I let everything go that did not fit into the life he designed for me. Now she stood in my father's study, looking at me with an expression that was equal parts anger and relief and something that might have been guilt. "You look terrible," she said, despite everything. I almost laughed. "Thanks, you look exactly the same. I have been trying to reach you for 3 years. 3 years. Claire did, and every time I called, he answered. Every time I showed up at your apartment, you were unavailable. Every email bounced back. Every text went unread. I thought you had abandoned me. I thought our friendship meant nothing to you. I thought I had to let you go. He made me think you were toxic, that you were jealous of what we had, that you wanted to destroy our marriage." Drew crossed the room and hugged me. Hard. "I know. I figured it out eventually, which is why I have been investigating him for the past 18 months. I pulled back, staring at her. "Investigating? What do you mean investigating?" "I am a journalist now. Investigative stuff, mostly financial corruption and corporate crime. And Marcus Hale has been on my radar since I realized what he was doing to you." She pulled a thick folder from her messenger bag. "I have sources who have whispered about him for years. Documents that suggest fraud, suspicious transactions that do not add up. But I am missing the inside view, the details that only someone who lived in that house would know." I thought about the late nights when Marcus would lock himself in his office, the phone calls in languages I did not understand, the nervous assistants who never lasted more than a few months before being quietly dismissed, the safe behind the painting of a sailboat, the one he told me never to touch. "I know things," I said slowly. "I just did not understand what they meant at the time. I did not want to understand." "Then help me understand. Help me prove what he really is. Not just an abusive husband, but a criminal. A man who has been breaking laws and destroying lives and hiding behind money and charm for years." My father leaned forward. "This is dangerous. If Marcus finds out we are investigating him, he will retaliate. The custody battle will become nuclear. He is already trying to destroy her," Drew said, meeting his gaze without flinching. "The tabloid stories, the public rehabilitation, the legal threats. He is fighting a war, and right now he is winning. The only way to stop him is to destroy him first, completely and permanently." I looked at the folder in Drew's hands, at the evidence she had gathered, at the 3 years of work she had done trying to save me, even when I did not know I needed saving, even when I had pushed her away. "Tell me what you need," as I said. "Tell me everything." And for the first time since the Christmas party, I felt something other than fear. I felt power. The plan was simple in theory and terrifying in practice. I still had keys to the penthouse. Marcus, in his arrogance, had never thought to change the locks. Why would he? I had never shown any sign of rebellion, never given any hint that I might fight back. I was his perfect, compliant wife, his beautiful possession. The idea that I might use those keys against him would never have occurred to him. That was about to change. Drew had identified specific documents we needed: financial records from the safe, access to Marcus's personal laptop, anything related to offshore accounts or shell companies, the fragments of information I had overheard over the years, conversations that meant nothing to me at the time. now formed a map that Drew could follow to much larger crimes. We chose a Thursday afternoon. Marcus would be in court all day for a deposition related to a business dispute. Jonathan Mercer would be with him. The penthouse would be empty. My father wanted to send security with me. I refused. If something goes wrong and there are witnesses, it becomes a legal nightmare. I explained. I need to do this alone, in and out. 30 minutes. You are 7 months pregnant. Claire, this is reckless. Staying married to him was reckless. Trusting him was reckless. This is survival. He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in his expression. Not just concern, but recognition. He was seeing his mother. He was seeing the strength that trauma sometimes forges in those who survive it. You have changed, he said quietly. No, I am just finally remembering who I was before him. The drive into Manhattan felt surreal. The city I had lived in for 5 years looked different somehow. The familiar streets now charged with danger and possibility. Drew stayed on a secure line, walking me through the plan one more time. 30 minutes, she said. In and out. Focus on the safe first. Photograph everything. The flash drives go into your bag. Then the laptop if you have time. Do not touch anything else. Do not leave any sign you were there. And if someone comes, they will not. But if they do, you are collecting personal belongings. You have every right to be there. Do not panic. Do not run. Walk out calmly and we regroup. The elevator ride to the penthouse was the longest of my life. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat, in my temples, in my fingertips pressed against the cold metal of my keys. My baby kicked restlessly, sensing my anxiety. It is okay, I whispered to him. We are going to be okay. This is how we get free. The key still worked. The door swung open onto the marble foyer, and for a moment I was frozen, overwhelmed by the memories this place held. Our wedding night, when he carried me over the threshold and promised to love me forever. The first time he hit me, in the kitchen, because I burned dinner. The 1,000 small cruelties I had absorbed and forgiven and absorbed again. Then I moved. The study was at the end of the hallway, past the living room with its floor-to-ceiling windows, and the dining room where we had hosted parties full of people who had no idea what happened when they left. The safe was behind a painting of a sailboat that Marcus had bought at auction for $200,000. I had always hated that painting. Too cold, too empty. Just like him, the combination was our wedding date. Of course it was. He was nothing if not sentimental about his conquests. Inside the safe, I found exactly what Drew had predicted. Flash drives labeled with dates and initials. Folders thick with documents. A second phone I had never seen before. One with no visible contacts but a history of calls to international numbers. A stack of cash in various currencies. And something else. Something I had not expected. A small black notebook, leather-bound, filled with handwritten entries. I photographed everything. My hands shaking so badly the images blurred, and I had to retake them twice. The flash drives went into my bag. The documents uploaded to Drew's secure server in real time. You are doing great, Drew said in my ear. 2 more minutes, then get out. I was reaching for the laptop on his desk when I heard the front door open. Every muscle in my body froze. Footsteps crossed the marble floor. Heels, not Marcus's heavy tread. A woman's voice, talking on the phone in low, urgent tones. Vanessa. I pressed myself against the wall of the study, heart pounding, desperately trying to calculate my options. The window was 30 floors up. The closet was too small. The only exit was through the door where Vanessa's footsteps were approaching. There was nowhere to hide. The footsteps stopped outside the study door. I could hear her breathing, hear her keys jingling, hear my own pulse thundering in my ears. I will call you back, Vanessa said, and ended her call. The door opened. We stared at each other across the dim room, 2 women frozen in a moment that could destroy everything. Her eyes went to my bag, to the open safe, to the evidence scattered across Marcus's desk. I waited for her to scream, to call Marcus, to end me. Instead, she did something I did not expect. She closed the door behind her and locked it. He hits me too, she said quietly. I just hide it better. I had imagined this moment 1,000 times, confronting the other woman, The screaming, the accusations, the satisfaction of finally putting a face to my humiliation. In my fantasies, I was righteous and she was remorseful, and justice was somehow served through the simple act of speaking truth. But standing in Marcus's study with Vanessa Cross, all I felt was exhaustion and recognition. The look in her eyes was one I knew intimately. The wariness, the shame, the desperate calculation of someone always trying to survive. How long? I asked. 2 years. He pursued me relentlessly. Flowers, gifts, promises. He told me he was going to leave you, that you were unstable, that the marriage was loveless, that you refused to give him children. She laughed bitterly. He said once you were out of the picture, we would be together, that I was the one he really loved. And you believed him. I believed a lot of things. She moved to the window, staring out at the city. I believed I was special, that I was different from the others, that he really did love me in some broken way. She touched her collarbone, and I noticed for the first time the heavy silk scarf she wore despite the warmth of the penthouse. The first time he grabbed my throat. I told myself it was stress. The second time, I told myself I had provoked him. By the third time, I was too scared to leave and too ashamed to ask for help. I recognized those words. I had said them myself, in the dark hours of the night when I tried to make sense of the chaos Marcus created. Why are you here? I asked. I forgot some files for a meeting, but that is not the real question, is it? She turned from the window, her eyes moving to the open safe, to the camera still in my hand, to the bag full of evidence that could destroy the man who had destroyed us both. The real question is, what are you doing here? And whether you are going to share what you find. I could have lied, made up some excuse about collecting personal belongings, but something in her eyes stopped me. The same trapped desperation I saw every time I looked in the mirror. We were two women caught in the same web, and the spider was hunting us both. I am gathering evidence, I said. Financial crimes, fraud, things that will put him in prison for a very long time. Vanessa was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a flash drive. I have been collecting evidence for 2 years, she said. Recordings of phone calls that I made without his knowledge, documents he does not know I copied, proof of bribes to city officials, offshore accounts that even his accountants do not know about. She held out the drive. I was too scared to use it, too scared of what he would do if he found out. But maybe together we stand a chance. I stared at the flash drive, at this woman I had hated for so long, at the strange alliance forming in the ruins of our shared pain. Why would you help me? I am the wife. You are the mistress. In the story everyone tells, we are supposed to be enemies. Because I am tired of being afraid, because I have spent 2 years waiting for him to keep his promises while he kept hurting me instead. And because when I saw that video of him kicking you at the Christmas party, I saw my future. I saw exactly what he would do to me once I stopped being useful. She pressed the drive into my palm. Take it, use it, end him. I took the flash drive. 3 weeks later, the FBI opened a formal investigation. Drew's story ran in the Washington Tribune, meticulously documented and devastating in its scope. Marcus Hale had not just cheated on his wife. He had built his entire empire on fraud. Shell companies designed to evade taxes, offshore accounts hidden from investors and regulators, bribes to building inspectors and city officials, forged permits for construction projects that violated safety codes, hundreds of millions of dollars stolen from partners and shareholders in pension funds. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Stock prices crashed, board members resigned, federal subpoenas flooded his legal team. The same people who had smiled and shaken his hand at galas were now falling over themselves to distance their names from his. For the first time since the Christmas party, I felt like we might actually win. I should have known it was too easy. The night before the FBI was scheduled to raid Marcus's offices, I received a call from Drew at 3 a.m. Her voice was tight with controlled panic. Vanessa is missing. I sat up in bed, my blood running cold. What do you mean missing? Her apartment was ransacked. Her phone is dead. Her car is still in the garage. No one has seen her since yesterday afternoon. Maybe she is hiding. Maybe she got scared and ran. Her passport is still there, Claire. Her medication is still there. She did not run. Drew's voice cracked. He took her. 2 hours later, I received a text from an unknown number. 6 words that turned my blood to ice. Withdraw everything or she dies. I stared at the screen, feeling the walls close in around me. Marcus was not just fighting back. He was escalating. Vanessa's life was the price of my rebellion, and I had to choose. I have learned that true despair does not announce itself. It does not arrive with thunder and drama. It creeps in quietly, settling into your bones like winter cold, until you cannot remember what warmth felt like. My father wanted to pay whatever ransom Marcus demanded. My mother wanted to call the FBI immediately and let them handle it. Drew wanted to run the story anyway, expose Marcus publicly, force his hand. Everyone had opinions about what I should do, but it was my choice, my conscience, my fault that Vanessa was in danger. I spent hours staring at the text message, at those 6 words that held a woman's life in the balance. Withdraw everything or she dies. Marcus knew me well enough to understand the impossible position he had created. Justice or mercy, vengeance or salvation. I could not have both. He was betting I would choose mercy. He was betting that the guilt of another woman's death would break me the way his fists never could. We can find her, Drew said. She had not slept in 2 days, her eyes red-rimmed, her voice hoarse from endless phone calls. Cell tower records, financial transactions, surveillance footage. If she is alive, there is a trail. And if she is not alive, Drew did not answer. She did not have to. Jonathan Mercer called that afternoon, his voice smooth and professional, as if we were discussing a business merger rather than a kidnapping. Mrs. Hale, my client has asked me to reach out. He believes there may be a path to resolution that benefits everyone. Where is Vanessa? I do not know what you mean. Miss Cross resigned her position last week. Her whereabouts are not my client's concern. You are lying. He took her. A pause. Then, I cannot speak to matters I have no knowledge of, but I can tell you that Mr. Hale remains committed to an amicable custody arrangement, one that ensures your child grows up with both parents in their life, one that avoids the unpleasantness of a prolonged legal battle. He kidnapped a woman. He is holding her hostage to silence me, allegedly. And allegations without proof are simply stories. Mrs. Hale, stories that can destroy reputations. Yes, but also stories that can be dismissed, forgotten, buried. He let the word hang in the air. Think carefully about your next move, for everyone's sake. He hung up, and I sat in the silence of my childhood bedroom, feeling the weight of impossible choices pressing down on me. Withdraw everything. Save Vanessa. Let Marcus win. Watch him walk free while my baby grew up calling him father. Keep fighting. Pursue justice. Let Vanessa die. Carry that weight forever. Neither option was acceptable. Both options were real. My baby kicked, a sharp reminder that I was not alone in this. Whatever choice I made would shape his world, his future, his understanding of what courage and cowardice looked like. What did I want him to learn? That his mother surrendered when things got hard, that she sacrificed justice to avoid difficult consequences? Or did I want him to learn that sometimes you fight even when fighting seems hopeless, that some things are worth more than safety, more than comfort, more than the easy path I called Drew? Find her, I said. Whatever it takes, do not stop until you find her. Drew's network worked through the night. Journalists, private investigators, former federal agents who owed favors and believed in justice. By morning, they had traced Vanessa's last known location to a warehouse in Queens, owned by a shell company that appeared in the documents I had photographed from Marcus's safe, the same shell company that Drew's investigation had flagged for fraud. If we go to the FBI with this, Drew said, spreading maps and documents across my father's desk, we prove the connection between Marcus and the kidnapping. We prove the shell company is real. We prove the fraud at the same time. It all falls like dominoes. But Vanessa? The FBI has tactical teams trained for exactly this situation. Hostage rescue is what they do. If we give them the location and the evidence, they can move within hours. I thought about Vanessa alone in some cold warehouse, afraid, wondering if anyone was coming for her. I thought about all the years I had spent alone, afraid, wondering the same thing. I want to be there, I said. Claire, you are 7 months pregnant. I want to be there. I need to see this end. I need to see his face when he realizes he lost. My father tried to stop me. My mother begged me to stay. But I had spent 5 years being told what I could and could not do, and I was done listening to anyone else's rules. He took everything from me. Tommy, I said, my dignity, my independence, my sense of self, my faith in my own judgment. I will not let him take this too. I will not let him take the ending. The FBI raid happened at dawn. I watched from a surveillance van parked 2 blocks away. Drew beside me, my father on a secure line. The warehouse was gray and featureless, tucked between abandoned buildings in an industrial district that time had forgotten. It was the kind of building you drive past 1,000 times without noticing. The kind of building where terrible things happen in silence. Tactical teams moved in formation, dark figures against the gray morning light. Their voices crackled through the radio, terse and professional. Alpha team in position. Bravo team flanking east. Stand by for breach. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the radio receiver. Every second felt like an hour. Every sound made me jump. Breach in 3, 2, 1. The door exploded inward. Shouts echoed across the empty lot. Gunfire. My heart stopped. Then, suspect down. Repeat. Suspect down. Not hail. Security personnel. More movement. More voices. An eternity compressed into minutes. Movement in the northeast corner. Female. Appears unharmed. Securing now. I did not realize I was crying until Drew handed me a tissue. The tears came silently. Relief and terror and exhaustion, all mixed together. They brought Vanessa out 20 minutes later, wrapped in a shock blanket. Her face pale, but her eyes alert. 2 days in that warehouse. Alone, afraid. Not knowing if anyone would come. She was bruised. She was traumatized. But she was alive. She saw the surveillance van, saw me watching through the tinted window, and something passed between us. Understanding. Gratitude. The bond of women who had survived the same monster. The arrest warrant for Marcus was issued within the hour. They found him at his penthouse, surrounded by lawyers, preparing a press conference to deny everything. He was dressed in his finest suit, his expression carefully calibrated for the cameras he expected to face. He did not expect the FBI agents who walked in instead. Marcus Hale, you are under arrest for kidnapping, conspiracy to commit fraud, bribery, and assault. You have the right to remain silent. The footage aired on every network by noon. Marcus in handcuffs, being led past the same doormen who had once bowed to him, past the same neighbors who had once envied him, into the back of a federal vehicle. His face went through every stage of grief in 30 seconds. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, never acceptance. Men like Marcus never accept defeat. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Vanessa testified about the kidnapping, about the years of abuse, about the documents she had collected. Her voice trembled, but did not break. She looked at Marcus only once, when she identified him as the man who had held her captive. And in that look was every ounce of rage she had been forced to swallow. Drew's reporting provided the financial evidence. Accountants and forensic experts walked the jury through years of fraud, explaining shell companies and offshore accounts and the elaborate web of lies Marcus had spun. I took the stand on a Wednesday afternoon, the sky outside gray with winter clouds. The prosecutor, Elizabeth Warren, had prepared me well, but nothing could prepare me for looking at Marcus across that courtroom, seeing the man I had married, the man I had loved, the man who had almost destroyed me. Mrs. Hale, Elizabeth said gently, can you tell the court about your marriage? I told them everything. The isolation, the control, the violence that escalated slowly. So slowly I did not recognize it until I was drowning. I told them about the gaslighting, the way he made me question my own sanity. I told them about the fear that lived in my chest like a second heartbeat. I told them about the Christmas party. When I finished, the courtroom was silent. Jurors wiped their eyes. Even the judge looked moved. Marcus's attorney tried to destroy me on cross-examination. He painted me as unstable, vindictive, a scorned woman seeking revenge. But I had spent 5 years being broken down by a master, and this lawyer was an amateur by comparison. I did not break. On a gray February morning, the jury returned their verdict, guilty on 47 counts. I was sitting in the gallery with my parents when Judge Patricia Winters read the sentence. 35 years federal prison and no parole. Marcus stood motionless as the words washed over him. For the first time since I had known him, he looked old, small, defeated. The charm that had dazzled me at that first gala was gone, replaced by the hollow desperation of a man who had finally lost. As the officers led him away, he turned to look at me. I expected rage, or hatred, or some final threat hissed through clenched teeth. Instead, I saw something worse. Understanding. He finally understood that he had lost, that his empire was ashes, that everything he built on cruelty and lies had been torn down by the woman he had dismissed as weak. I did not look away. I did not feel triumph. Exactly. Triumph implies a contest, a winner and a loser, something to celebrate. What I felt was simpler than that. I felt free. Outside the courthouse, snow was falling. Drew hugged me, then disappeared to file her follow-up story. My mother held my hand while my father stood slightly apart, watching me with an expression I could not quite read. "You did it," he said finally. "We did it, all of us." He shook his head. "No, I provided resources. Drew provided information. Vanessa provided evidence. But you provided something more important." He took my hand. "You provided courage. The courage to speak, the courage to fight, the courage to stand in front of the world and tell the truth even when the truth was painful." I thought about all the years I had been silent, all the times I had told myself that endurance was strength, that keeping peace was wisdom, that love meant sacrifice. I had been so wrong. "I should have been braver sooner," I said. "You were brave when it mattered. That is all any of us can do." 1 year later, I stood in the lobby of a building that had not existed 12 months before. The Weston Cross Foundation occupied the former site of one of Marcus's abandoned construction projects, a lot that had sat empty and neglected while he funneled the development money into offshore accounts. Now it was transformed into a gleaming structure of glass and white stone, filled with light and purpose. The sign above the entrance was etched in silver, surrounded by soft blue flowers that my mother had chosen after weeks of deliberation. She said blue represented hope and renewal. I said it reminded me of the dress I wore on the worst night of my life, and how that night led to the best chapter. Inside, the space hummed with activity, counselors meeting with clients in private offices, lawyers reviewing cases in a conference room, children playing in a supervised area while their mothers filled out paperwork and learned about resources they never knew existed. This was what healing looked like. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of purpose. My son James was 11 months old now, a cheerful baby with my eyes and his own stubborn personality. He sat in my arms as I prepared to give the opening remarks for the Foundation's first anniversary celebration, grabbing at my necklace with determined fingers. It was not diamonds or emeralds. It was a simple gold chain with a small pendant shaped like a bird in flight. Drew had given it to me the day the verdict came in. "For the woman who learned to fly," she had said. Vanessa stood beside me, recovered and strong after months of therapy and rest. She served as co-director of survivor services, using her experience to help other women recognize the signs of abuse before they were too deep to escape. "Nervous?" she asked. "Terrified," I admitted. "A year ago, I could barely speak in front of my own family. Now I am supposed to inspire strangers." "You inspired me. That is not nothing." Drew was somewhere into the crowd, taking notes for a follow-up story about the Foundation's impact. She had won a Pulitzer Prize for her coverage of Marcus's trial, but she said this story mattered more. "Destruction is easy to write about," she told me once. "Rebuilding is harder and more important." My parents sat in the front row, my father's hand resting on my mother's knee. They looked older than they had a year ago, the toll of worry and fear written on their faces. But they also looked at peace. The room was full of survivors, women who had found their way to us through referrals, through news coverage, through the simple act of one person telling another that help existed. Some I had met personally, others I knew only as names on intake forms. All of them mattered. I stepped to the microphone, adjusting James on my hip. "Thank you for being here," I began. "A year ago, I was lying on a marble floor surrounded by shattered Christmas ornaments, convinced my life was over. I had spent 5 years in a marriage that slowly erased everything I thought I knew about myself. My confidence, my independence, my sense of worth, my ability to trust my own judgment. The room was silent. Every face turned toward me. I want to tell you something important, something I wish someone had told me years ago. I took a breath. Your silence does not protect you. It protects the person who hurt you. And the moment you break that silence, you take back power you did not even know you had lost. I looked at Vanessa, who nodded slightly, her eyes glistening. This foundation exists because of broken silence, because one woman chose to speak, then another, then another, and together, we built something that will outlast the pain that created it. James reached for the microphone, and the room laughed, the tension breaking into warmth. My son will grow up in a world where he knows what courage looks like. Not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. Not perfection, but persistence. Not victory, but survival. I paused, remembering all the nights I had spent alone, wondering if I would ever feel whole again. To everyone in this room who has survived something that should have destroyed you, thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for fighting. Thank you for proving that the story does not end with the fall. It ends with the rising. The applause that followed was not the polished response of a ballroom crowd. It was real, raw, the sound of people who understood what it meant to break and rebuild. Afterward, as the reception wound down and the winter sun began to set, I walked outside with James. The city stretched before us, lights beginning to flicker on as dusk settled. It was the same city where everything had broken, now transformed by everything we had built. A woman approached hesitantly, clutching a small purse. Her eyes were red from crying. She was young, maybe 25, with a bruise fading along her jawline that she had tried to cover with makeup. I recognized that bruise. I recognized the way she held herself, shoulders curled inward, trying to take up as little space as possible. I saw your story, she said quietly, on the news. I did not believe it was possible to leave. But then I saw you standing up in that courtroom, and I thought maybe there was hope. I shifted James to my other hip and took her hand. There is hope, I said. It is hard to see when you are in the middle of the storm. It is hard to believe when everyone tells you that you are the problem. But I promise you there is hope, and there are people who will help you find it. She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. Come inside, I said. Let me introduce you to someone who can help. I led her through the glass doors, into the warmth of the foundation, into the beginning of her own story. Behind us, the sun dipped below the skyline, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The Christmas lights were going up along the avenue, twinkling in the gathering dusk. A year ago, those lights had been the backdrop to the worst moment of my life. This year, they meant something else entirely. They meant survival. They meant purpose. They meant the quiet, powerful truth that we are never as broken as we believe, that the fall is not the end, that sometimes the things that shatter us are the things that set us free. James reached for a strand of lights, his small fingers catching the glow, and I smiled. You see that, I whispered to him. That is what hope looks like. We stood there together, mother and son, watching the lights come alive across the city, somewhere in a federal prison. Marcus Hale was spending his first of many winters behind bars. Somewhere in the building behind me, a young woman was taking the first steps toward a new life. And here, in this moment, I was finally completely, utterly whole. Not because the pain was gone. It was not. Some wounds leave scars that never fully fade. But because I had learned that wholeness is not the absence of cracks, it is the gold that fills them. It is the light that shines through. The wind picked up, cold and fresh, carrying the promise of snow. James laughed at the sensation, and the sound was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. I turned back toward the foundation, toward the warmth and the work and the people who needed me. There was so much left to do, so many stories yet to be told, so many women yet to find their way to freedom. But tonight I allowed myself this moment, this peace, this quiet victory. The Christmas lights glittered against the darkening sky, each one a small promise of warmth in the winter cold. And I smiled, because for the first time in longer than I could remember, I knew exactly who I was. I was Claire Weston, survivor. Mother, fighter, and my story was just beginning.